This is a pope under pressure. In Ireland today, begging forgiveness for the sexual abuse of children by priests and for the cover-up by the church's hierarchy. The crowd here far smaller than the 500,000 organisers predicted. A difficult day began with a former Vatican ambassador to the US accusing the Pope of a cover-up and calling on him to quit. Archbishop Carlo Vigano says Francis knew about allegations of sexual abuse by American Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, but did nothing for 5 years until the Cardinal resigned last month. In a 7,000-word statement published on 2 Catholic news sites, Archbishop Vigano alleged corruption has reached the very top of the Church's hierarchy. The Pope, he said, must set a good example and resign. Vigano is an arch critic of Francis. He offered no evidence. The Pope faced dissent too on Irish streets. An American victim of clerical abuse says he failed to act. So a missed opportunity by the Pope?
Totally missed opportunity, a completely missed opportunity.
The Pope is leaving Ireland and these protests behind, but not this crisis, which is global and growing. Tonight on his plane, the Pope reacted to his former Vatican official. I won't say a single word about this statement, he said. The Pope, though, did confirm he'd read it. It is perhaps the most public challenge to his leadership yet, and from within.
Pope Francis is under mounting pressure to take accountability for the sex abuse scandal, really dogging the Catholic Church, but he is refusing to respond to a former Vatican official's call for his resignation. Carlo Maria Vigano said in a statement that it is because he told the Pope 5 years ago about alleged misconduct involving a former Washington, D.C. cardinal. Vigano goes on to say that the Pope did nothing about it. When asked about the allegation and call to resign, this is what Pope Francis did say, quote, "I will not say a single word about this. I believe the statement speaks for itself, and you have the sufficient journalistic ability to make your conclusions. It's an act of trust." The Pope also said he may speak on the issue at a later date.
There's certainly some history here, Brooke, between this diplomat and Pope Francis. We have to remember that about 2 years ago, Pope Francis actually replaced this archbishop, the reason being that he had allegedly arranged this secret meeting between Pope Francis and Kim Davis. Not sure you remember her. She's the Kentucky clerk who refused to sign these same-sex marriage certificates a few years back. Well, Vigano is also a leader of a conservative anti-Francis faction within the Catholic Church. So many have said that politics are certainly at play here, that they are at the base of the claims made in a very lengthy statement. However, there is certainly increased pressure here on the Catholic Church, Brooke. In this statement, Vigano claims that there are dozens of Vatican officials, all the way up to the Pope, who ignored and knew about the sex abuse allegations against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. If you remember him, he was removed from the ministry last month and forced to resign. In his statement, the Archbishop insists that he told the pontiff personally about the behavior of Cardinal McCarrick. I want to read you a portion of the letter that I've read through this morning. He writes, "The Pope learned about it from me on June 23, 2013 and continued to cover for him. Pope Francis must be the first to set a good example for cardinals and bishops who covered up McCarrick's abuses and resign along with all of them."
We are joined now by Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Josh, good morning to you. Thanks for coming by.
Morning.
The grand jury there in Pennsylvania, it unearthed what's described as secret archives from the Catholic Church. And those archives reportedly show a systematic cover-up of child sex abuse in Pennsylvania. What else did those secret archives show? Who had access to those archives?
23 grand jurors met for 2 years in Pennsylvania. They unearthed over 301 predator priests, more than 1,000 victims, children in Pennsylvania. They found that there was not only widespread sexual abuse, rape of children, but they found that there was a systematic cover-up. that went all the way to the Vatican. What was just so profoundly horrifying about this was, you know, church leaders would lie to parishioners on Sunday. They would lie to the public. They would shield these predators from law enforcement, but then they would document all of it and place it in the secret archives, just feet away from the
We're talking about like papers in a closet in a box, like, oh, this is what really happened and we're just going to lock the door?
Quite literally, they would document it, you know, years ago in handwriting, then in typing. Well, in part because that's what canon law calls for, and in part it's just inexplicable. It's horrifying to think what these men of God did to these children, and then to have the cover-up that quite literally was very purposeful. They were doing it to shield these predator priests from law enforcement. Look, in Pennsylvania, we have a limitation on the amount of time that law enforcement can bring charges against both the predators and those who enabled the cover-up. And so they would shield them, or they would pass them around for years to avoid law enforcement.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is, you know, you drop this years-long investigation. It makes a huge splash. Has your office now been getting calls from other victims? And in particular, are any of those cases in your mind potentially prosecutable? In other words, within the statute of limitations, some district attorney could look at the case and prosecute a priest who committed abuse.
Well, Savannah, one of the things we're most proud of is that we gave victims their voice back. We allowed them to have their truth shared. And we know that in sharing their truth, other victims are going to come forward and share their truth. I'll tell you that in the roughly 2 weeks since we released the report, we've received 733 calls to our special clergy abuse hotline. We're tracking down each and every one of those tips, talking to each and every one of the people that have called. And certainly, if we can bring a case on any of this against any predator priest or anyone who covered it up, we will do so.
Josh, do you have evidence that the Pope had knowledge or participated in a cover-up with regards to the Pennsylvania diocese?
We have evidence that the Vatican had knowledge of the cover-up. I can't specifically speak to Pope Francis, but I think the broader issues here with the Vatican knowing about this, with church leaders knowing about it, and the reaction you've seen, not just from Catholics, but Americans and people all across the globe, is just a fundamental disappointment and anger in institutions. We're seeing institutions, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's at universities, whether it's in government centers, and certainly whether it's at the church, putting their own institutional reputation above the welfare of children. We will not tolerate that in Pennsylvania, and we shouldn't tolerate it anywhere.
But this was, as I said, a comprehensive report. It went back 70 years.